consultant.
My name is David Baker, and I'm a member.
My name is Kendall Starks, and I'm a member.
My name is Skylar, and I'm the Vice President. For clarification in today's debate, I'd like to offer the following definitions. Historic preservation: any activity that identifies, protects, rehabilitates, or enhances historic resources. PlanetZen.com. Equestrian, related to horseback riding. Merriam-Webster. Economic development: programs, policies, and activities that seek to improve economic well-being and quality of life for a community. International Economic Development Council. Cultural erasure: the suppression and disappearance of a culture's distinct elements. Source: the Sustainability Dictionary. There is no new world that you make without the old world. American Canadian urbanist Jane Jacobs once asserted the significance of past environments inherently serves as the basis for future environments. Aiken County must allow this philosophy to guide the handling of our historic sites because it would drive economic opportunities and protect our community's identity. It is for these reasons that I feel compelled to affirm today's resolution. Historic preservation ought to be prioritized at Aiken, South Carolina. Historic preservation is vital to Aiken's economy. Aiken's historic preservation laws bolster many of the industries that are vital to Aiken's economy. For example, Aiken's blossoming tourism industry relies on Aiken's rich historical culture. According to Eric Gordon, the tourism director for the city of Aiken, 2025 saw 10,000 more tourists visit Aiken to 2024. This growth is expected to translate to a 10% increase in tourism for 2026. Furthermore, Gordon states that there are 5 pillars which are vital to tourism in the city of Aiken: art, history, parks, downtown, and the equestrian industry. Almost all these pillars have some connection to the history of Aiken and are in turn protected by the historic preservation efforts. Most apparently, Aiken's history is protected by the Overlay District Ordinance, which states that it is essential that areas, sites, structures, and objects related to the history of Aiken, as well as that of Aiken County, be preserved. This law ensures that both the history of Aiken and its beautiful historic architecture are preserved. Furthermore, this law points out that preservation, quote, preserves property values, attracts businesses, tourists, and residents alike. Laws like the Overlay District Ordinance prove the importance of Aiken's history to the greater economy of the city. Additionally, the historic architecture that comprises downtown is protected by laws protecting Aiken's history. Finally, the equestrian industry's survival is predicated on historic preservation efforts. Nonprofits like the Aiken Land Conservatory fight to protect Aiken's historic forest district from unmanaged development. The Land Conservatory keeps areas in the historic forest district unpaved and ideal for the equine community. This proves Aiken's deep equestrian history and culture. These preservation efforts takes history to its cultural industries. Historic preservation is also necessary for preventing cultural erasure. The downtown Aiken area is full of historic architecture that both gives the area character and serves functional purpose. For example, Aiken Tennis Club is a nearly 120-year-old building that served as the competition ground for World Championship challenger matches. Moreover, the club has trained 6 world champions. This is a beautiful part of Aiken's history that deserves to be protected. Furthermore, Aiken's premier hotel, the Wilcox, is over 100 years old. The Wilcox has served some of the most influential and powerful people in the United States history, such as FDR and the Vanderbilt family. Buildings and businesses like these are core to Aiken's history, and people in Aiken have repeatedly fought to preserve them. Most famously, Aiken's recently rallied together to reject the Pascalis project. The Pascalis project was a redevelopment project that was focused on downtown's Newberry Street. The project was initially presented as a renovation to the historic Hotel Aiken. However, as the project progressed, it revealed that Hotel Aiken and 7 other industries were going to be demolished completely. Upon this revelation, the people of Aiken rallied together to stop the demolition from happening. The public protest came to pursue legal action to all concern the history of Aiken. The facts paint a clear picture. Historic preservation is not only necessary for the economy, but it is necessary to make sure that Aiken stays Aiken. The affirmative rests.
Once said, the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas, but in escaping old ones. For growing economies and growing areas like our own Aiken County, local policy must prioritize development and strong, reliable economy, rather than letting the past hinder it. My name is Sara Greenwood, and I strongly negate today's resolution that historic development ought to be prioritized in Aiken County. First, tourism-driven preservation economies are less sustainable. As of March 7, 2026, the average annual pay in the tourism industry in the United States was $46,014 a year, which is significantly lower than that of many economic development sectors, such as manufacturing and energy, which often exceed $70,000 annually. This matters because economies built primarily on preservation and tourism tend to produce lower wages, slower wage growth, and less stability, especially during economic downturns. For example, the COVID-19 pandemic. Throughout the global economy, travel and tourism were among the most affected sectors in the COVID pandemic. In 2020 and 2021, international tourism flow was reduced by 74% and 72% respectively, resulting in a staggering loss of $3.8 to $4.7 trillion per year, export revenue per year, according to the National Center for Biotechnology Information. Tourism economic vulnerability refers to how dependent tourism-based economies are on external shocks. On the authority of economic environmentalist experts at Pollution Sustainability Directory, this vulnerability arises from the sector's inherent dependencies on natural resources, stable climatic conditions, and geopolitical stability, and is amplified by the escalating impact of climate change, pollution stemming from tourism activities, and shifts in consumer preferences. Although historic preservation exhibits specific values, and absolute prioritization of it inevitably fosters economic overdependence on tourism, which undermines long-term stability and resilience. Second, economic adaptability is essential for growing regions. John Pettinger stated in 2023 that economic growth, measured by an increase in GDP, brings higher living standards by raising incomes and creating more jobs, while also boosting tax revenues that allow governments to improve public services without increasing tax rates. As previously highlighted, tourism-driven economies fail to deliver these benefits at the same level as diversified, development-focused economies. Lower wages from the tourism sector translate to less consumer spending, reduced tax revenue, and fewer resources for public services. Opposingly, let's take the specific example of the Savannah River site. Established in Aiken County in 1950, the site received initial backlash due to the scale of development required and the abnormality compared to the area's economy at the time. However, this economic investment transformed the local economy, bringing 15,813 residents employment, offering an average annual income of $97,918, generating $289 million in local taxes, and spending $114,607,052 on local historically underutilized businesses. Economy-focused business projects like the SRS and the Aiken Regional Medical Center provide high-paying, year-round jobs and support long-term county growth, overshadowing the benefits of any historic preservation program in the past decades. Finally, strict historic preservation policies can intentionally limit who gets to live and invest in certain areas. A study in the Journal of American Planning Association found that areas with historic designation frequently come with complicated requirements, increasing maintenance costs, and heedless zone changes, turning our most precious areas, like downtown Aiken, into spaces that only the wealthy can afford, while making it harder for younger and lower-income families to assimilate. These results directly oppose the definition of sustainability when they fully compromise our future generations' abilities to enjoy our precious town. While preservation and tourism have value and are actively supported by the government, prioritizing them limits opportunity, weakens economic stability, and risks leaving future generations behind. We should want the next generation to not only remember Aiken, but to be able to afford and grow here. And for those reasons, I firmly negate today's resolution, the negative rest.
Okay, so what you just saw were two very different styles of delivering what is called a debate constructive. What did you notice about Skylar's? What was the way that when he was speaking? Speaking really fast. That's actually a debate technique called spreading, in which the debate competitors try to get as much information in the time constraints they possibly can. So you have to be really good listeners to be able to hear it. Okay? What you saw from Sara, what did you notice about Sara's constructive? Was it slower? Was it a little bit easier to understand? Okay? But what you have to do is not allow yourself, because they both may have provided very, very good information, so you just have to listen carefully. So again, this is not a speech contest, this is a content contest. So we're looking to see who supports their topic with the most logical, well-reasoned argument. And the proof is going to be in the pudding. Once they get to the spontaneous part, all that was pre-written. Now they're going to have to be able to support arguments on the fly. And so we're going to see how they do with that. Listen carefully. If you have a pen or a pencil, make sure you're jotting down notes on which team you think is supporting your argument the best. Okay? All right, are you all ready for your crop fire?
If the economy becomes reliant on tourism, how does it remain stable during downturns or decreases in travel?
The truth is that tourism industry always bounces back. Yes, Aiken's tourism industry did experience a downturn in COVID, but now it's increasing unprecedented growth.
And you wouldn't say that tourism is incredibly dependent on external factors like climate and pollution, and that could make it very unreliable to center our economy and prioritize our economy on tourism and preservation?
I would say that it is reliant on external factors, but it's reliant the same way the jobs of manufacturing are. If a manufacturing plant closes and the town is reliant on it, the town dissolves.
And you would not admit that manufacturing, despite the fact that it has many backups, is as vulnerable as tourism, which is extremely reliant on external factors. You can say that's an even comparison.
I would say so because tourism bounces back. When manufacturing plants close, there's nothing you can do about that. The jobs are gone and the people suffer. Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
You mentioned that tourism creates pollution, but is it not true that manufacturing industries also create significant amounts of air, water, and soil pollution?
We did not say that it creates pollution.
Okay. You also said that Aiken should shift towards a focus on the energy industry. Are you aware that Aiken has no significant amount of energy resources like natural gas or oil?
We have the Savannah Riverside, which is in Aiken County, which is an extreme energy source, and it brings so much money to the economy, up into the billions each year.
Yes, but SRS requires investment from the federal government, which is not guaranteed.
It produces energy. Not produces, but it has to do with energy. And we also have manufacturing, we have healthcare, like the Aiken Regional Medical Center. We have so many industries that go into those economic sectors, which brings so much more than tourism has.
Yes, tourism is a deep part of Aiken's history. Since 1835, Aiken has been a popular tourist destination for northerners during the winter months.
And do you not think that if we can produce a lot of money from these other economic more dependent sectors, that we would be able to put those resources and that money towards preservation rather than relying on tourism, which does not bring enough money?
I think historic preservation is about more than just tourism. It preserves the character of the town.
Can you go further on that?
Yeah, historic buildings like Hotel Aiken and the Wilcox have been a deep part of this town's history for over 100 years.
All right, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
How does prioritizing preservation over economic growth improve long-term living standards for residents?
Can you repeat that?
How does prioritizing preservation over economic growth improve long-term living standards for residents?
While it may not go as far towards improving long-term living standards, it keeps our town's culture unique and individual.
So you're saying that we need preservation to maintain the history and the character of Aiken, but what is the point of that if people can't afford to live here in the future? What's the point of preserving that character? I think that economic growth and sustainability should be a very big part of this debate.
A lot of Aiken's historically preserved industries do create.
The negative contends that history is not worth preserving. However, it is important to remember that history constantly repeats itself and must be preserved so that we will not be doomed to repeat it. When communities discard their historical landmarks and stories behind them, they prevent themselves from being able to understand events which fully shaped their society. For example, the Battle of Aiken is a significant part of Aiken's history which occurred during the Civil War. Understanding events like these help people to realize that the Civil War affected everyone, even those living in small towns, and stands as a constant reminder of the consequences of a divided nation. In addition, our opposition insisted that historic preservation laws hinder Aiken's economic development. This argument is contradictory, though, considering that much of Aiken's economy relies on the equestrian industry, which is protected by Aiken's historic preservation laws. For example, Hitchcock Woods, a protected forest and a beloved spot for trail riding, fox hunting, and horse shows throughout the year has been here for just over a century. Without preservation in place, places such as Pitchrock Woods would be developed or industrialized, eliminating an integral part of Aiken's history and economy. They have also declared that historic preservation is high maintenance and historic sites are beyond repair, making preservation unnecessary. While preservation can require investment, so does demolishing them and rebuilding them. Additionally, preservation is a much more cost-effective thing than demolition and rebuilding of industries, because many preservation projects qualify for state grants, federal funding, and tax incentives. For example, the Aiken County Public Library, which provides technology and books that are of use for modern needs, is functioning in the same building it used whenever it was Aiken Institute and Aiken Elementary, effectively preserving its past while maintaining purpose with the help of some government funding and tax exemptions. The opposition also noted that historical sites fail to accommodate modern life. However, historic preservation does not prevent modernization. It allows for buildings to be adapted to their current need while maintaining the historic building and characteristics. For example, the Aiken County Courthouse is still functioning as a government building while preserving its historic architecture. The negative also says that Aiken ought to prioritize energy and manufacturing industries over historic preservation. Historic preservation does not block economic growth from occurring. Instead, it supports the type of growth that will benefit Aiken in the long term. The economy of Aiken is built around hospitality and tourism. Expanding heavy industries into this small town would create air and water pollution, making the area less desirable to live in. So if Aiken was not able to attract people with its events and things such as that, then there would be no more people coming, so the long term would be affected. In addition, the opposition stated that historic preservation slows down progress for societies as a whole, but preservation doesn't stop progress, it guides it. Without preservation, cities would become culturally indistinguishable and overdeveloped, meaning that there would be no true value to the city outside of housing and jobs. People choose to live in cities based off of the things that they have to offer, such as historical sites. So if a city has minimal attractions, it will fail to grow its population. The negative also mentioned that society should focus on the future rather than the past. However, ignoring the past does not mean, focusing on the future does not mean ignoring the past. In fact, they must be connected. And Aiken's future economy and prosperity depends on the identity and history of the town, which attracts people today. Additionally, the negative commented that new development brings in more money than preservation does. This is not true. Tourism-based economies are long-term and sustainable, whereas new developments have the possibility of failing and devastating the economy. Aiken's historic charm, which constantly attacks new visitors and previous visitors alike, provides reliable revenue. The opposition has repeatedly said that historic preservation is meant to benefit the wealthy, but historical preservation benefits the entire community, not just the rich, by providing communal spaces and jobs in relation to those spaces. The Aiken County Historical Museum, for example, is open to the
Okay, so I just want to clarify some things. First of all, we did not say that we had to ignore the past. We said that the past has values, but in order to help preserve and bring the money to help preserve the past, we have to focus on economically strong sectors like manufacturing and energy. They also said that Aiken Elementary is funded by government money to help preserve itself. That government money comes from the SRS, most likely, because the SRS brings an extreme amount of money, up to, I think, $600 million in tax revenue to the government. So, and they also said that historic economies bring more money. That is simply not true. Historic economies have some of the lowest wages compared especially to the manufacturing and energy businesses. And our town is also not built on hospitality and tourism. Hospitality and tourism is around under 10% of the economy. And specifically equestrian, because they brought up equestrian, that is less than 1% of our economy. And again, those things can all be funded if we prioritize economic development. Now, they said that, again, historic preservation boosts tourism and the economy. While it does help the tourism sector, that is far from the main source of revenue in Aiken. According to the Aiken Standard, the top employers in Aiken County are all major corporations like the Savannah River Site and Bridgestone Tire Plant. In fact, the Savannah River Site employs around 7% of the Aiken area. Additionally, tourism-based economies does not produce the same economic outcomes as diversified development. As we contended earlier, tourism-focused sectors pay less and are drastically more susceptible to changing factors. and produce less for the overall economy. While tourism increases activity, given that we have not completely ruled it out in our argument, it does not maximize income, stability, or long-term growth. An economy built primarily on tourism may grow, but it grows slower, less equitably, and with greater vulnerability. They also said historic buildings are a key part of Aiken's history. The city of Aiken does have a rich history. However, this never has and never should overpower the city's prioritization of its people. Currently, Aiken is facing rapid expansion. The population has grown nearly 30% in the past 20 years. By focusing primarily on economic growth, Aiken can accommodate for new homeowners seeking affordable housing. Without this prioritization, the city faces an immediate housing crisis and thousands could suffer. And we did not say that buildings in Aiken were beyond repair, just to clarify that. They also said that historic preservation protects culture and identity/history. Cultural preservation is important, but this debate is about priority, not elimination. A strong economy is what actually allows communities to maintain and invest in their history long term. Without economic growth, there are fewer resources for preservation itself. In fact, areas with higher median income spend significantly more on cultural institutions and historic maintenance, according to a study by the University of Chicago. Economic strength supports preservation, not the other way around. They also said that tourism is a major industry in South Carolina. While tourism is a major industry, size does not equal economic effectiveness. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, leisure and hospitality jobs average around $30,000 to $40,000 annually, significantly lower than industries like manufacturing, which often exceed $65,000 to $75,000 annually. They also said historic preservation itself is economic development, but it, again, does not produce the same level of output as diversified industries. For example, the Savannah River site, which is a major employer in Aiken County, generates hundreds of millions of dollars, up to billions, annually in wages along far exceeding tourism-based sectors. They also said that majority of Aiken's population supports historic preservation. This is supported mainly by the wealthiest of Aiken. However, this support completely overlooks the current demand for affordable housing as young homeowners are entering Aiken. And they said preservation creates jobs. Historic preservation may happen to create a few more local jobs, but economic growth is the real fuel of the city's employment and well-being. By definition, the prioritization of economic growth is an increase in productivity and innovation and quality of living. And they also mentioned the SAHS project, which demonstrates Aiken's desire for historic preservation over financial.
Okay, so before this next crossfire, I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of a stretch break, but then I'm going to need you to be on it because the remainder of the debate is going to get pretty intense, okay? You want to take a little stretch break, that's fine. Also, kind of gather your thoughts about which side you think is defending their position the best. A little stretch break.
I don't want to because it's the 18th class. We're probably going to go. I didn't officially tell Mrs. Peppy that I'm going to 4 o'clock.
I really wish I could hear my boss, but I have AP and she already has to get a turn and I need her training. I am way off.
This is so funny. I'm so dead. No, I'm talking about my live stream.
Oh, you're doing the live stream? What are people saying? What are the people saying?
Let me
think of yourself when you listen to this crossfire now. I want you to imagine that you're in that seat and you had to come up with questions to ask the opposition. Jot those down. If time remains, we're hoping to be able to have some questions and answers. And, you could take on that role of cross-examiner and ask some questions. So without further ado, I think everybody is in now. Those doors are closed and locked. Nobody else is coming back in. Okay. All right, Sara.
You believe that SRS jobs have more value to the city of Aiken than other jobs? Is it not true that SRS jobs require highly specialized labor?
I believe many jobs have their own special requirements, so we're focusing on how they bring so much more money into the economy, and again, that money can be put towards the these jobs.
But jobs in the tourism industry and hospitality do not have these high requirements. Many do not require a college degree to provide jobs to people who were born and raised in the city of Aiken, while jobs like SRS provide jobs to those who come in from other places.
The tourism jobs give significantly lower wages and overall annual pay, which is why they have less requirements to work there because they pay much less.
Yes, but they also provide jobs to those who don't have the resources to get the education required to get a job at a highly specialized place like SRS.
Then why does more of Aiken County have jobs at SRS and these other sectors than in tourism?
Because SRS is a massive nuclear energy producer, and people come around from all around this United States. Not necessarily people who were born in Aiken. It doesn't necessarily provide economic value to Aiken itself, but rather to people who happen to live here.
No, but it gives money back to the government so that the government can spend that on schools and building infrastructure and public services. That's how it gives back to the economy. And also, many, again, of its employers live in Aiken County, and because of the money they get from SRS, they are able to afford their house. They're able to afford to feed their family. It supports the overall town of Aiken.
It supports the overall town of Aiken, but the tax revenue that it provides would be no different if it was anywhere else. The money goes to the federal government. If it was in Wyoming, the money would still be able to go to places like Aiken Elementary.
The money still goes to the local, state, and the federal government, and it still is going towards projects in Aiken County. Now, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
You brought up Pascal's project. Do you know that the reason that this most likely failed was because it faced numerous legal challenges, violated multiple state laws, and had many ethical concerns, not just because people wanted historic preservation?
Yes, but it's also stated that one of the primary reasons Pascal's project failed was because they lacked public support and lacked clarity to the public.
They lacked public support because it faced numerous legal challenges and violated state laws. That doesn't
Yes.
necessarily mean that people want historic preservation. It means that it was violating standards.
Yes, but it also did violate historic preservation. People want to see the Hotel Aiken preserved, not demolished.
But again, the point that I'm bringing up is that that was not the main reason of concern. Most of the concern came from the fact that it was facing those numerous legal charges.
A lot of these charges come from a place of historic preservation. The laws that violate are historic preservation laws.
I think we should move this conversation on.
I agree.
All band students that are attending the field trip report to the band room at this time.
Excuse me.
Today, the Affirmative would like to leave you with the following words. Aiken must prioritize historic preservation so that our economy can continue to grow, so that our culture stays unique, so that our people stay happy. Over and over, the citizens of Aiken have faced attempts to destroy our history, and over these attempts have been rejected. And today is no different. Today, we affirm that the resolution, Aiken ought to prioritize historic preservation because it is economically and socially correct. The affirmative rests.
The core of this debate is not whether historic preservation has value. The question is whether it should be prioritized above all else. Throughout this discussion, it has been demonstrated that while preservation contributes to tourism and cultural identity, it does not provide the same level of economic stability or long-term opportunity as diversified economic development. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, jobs in tourism-related industries typically average around $30,000 to $40,000 annually, significantly lower than that of sectors like manufacturing and energy, which often exceed $65,000 to $70,000 per year. This difference is not just numerical, it directly impacts people's lives. Lower wages mean less financial security, reduced local spending, and fewer resources available to support schools, infrastructure, and public services. In contrast, higher-paying industries generate stronger tax bases and create opportunities for long-term economic stability. We see this clearly in the Savannah River site, but also in the Aiken Regional Medical Center, which is one of the county's other largest employers, supporting over 1,000 jobs in the healthcare sector. These are stable, year-round positions that provide consistent income and essential services to the community. More broadly, Aiken County has over 63,000 jobs and with an average wage of $60,000 annually, generating billions in local income. Unlike tourism, which often fluctuates with seasons and external factors, sectors like healthcare, manufacturing, and energy, and more provide long-term stability, strengthen the tax base, and ensure that communities have the resources to grow and invest in their future. Additionally, prioritizing preservation can radically limit future opportunities. By restricting redevelopment in high-demand areas, it can drive up property values and make it more difficult for younger families and new businesses to establish themselves. In a growing community, that creates a barrier to long-term success. Aiken County is not a static place. It is a community that must continue to grow, diversify, and respond to change. Economies that rely too heavily on a single sector, particularly one as variable as tourism, are more vulnerable to downturns and less equipped to support future generations. Preserving history should never come at the cost of limiting the future. A community is not defined by only what it has been, but by what it allows itself to become. The negative rest.
You mentioned that historic preservation hinders development in high-demand areas. What high-demand areas are being hindered by historic preservation in Aiken?
Because of restriction laws on how you can redevelop properties, it makes property values drastically increase, which means that future generations will not be able to afford, or future businesses will not be able to afford to establish themselves in Aiken.
What high-demand areas are being restricted by historic preservation?
In downtown Aiken. Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
If younger families can't afford to preserve areas, how does that preserve the community's long-term identity and, quote, serve the future environment?
While they can't live in historic areas like downtown, because it is expensive, they can still enjoy the history that it provides. Anyone can go downtown. You don't have to live there to go there. Anyone can go to Hitchcock Woods. You don't have to live near there to go there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask you another question?
Of course.
Do you have a statistic as to how much the 10,000 tourists generated in 2025?
Can you repeat that?
This was a part of your constructed. Do you have a statistic as to how much the 10,000 tourists generated in 2025?
No, you're not.
Well, Savannah Riverside generates roughly $700 million in wages, $289 million in local taxes, and $150 million towards local businesses all annually. That means it would take millions of tourists each year to even near producing a comparable amount of money.
Yes, but these jobs go to college-educated individuals. The tourism industry provides jobs for those who can't afford resources like college.
And
The industry is vital for lower-income families.
And the tourism industry does not provide high wages, which is the point that I've consistently reiterated, meaning how would that benefit lower-income families? That is not helping them grow.
The lower-income families don't have the resources to take jobs like SRS. It's not a lack of jobs, it's the fact that they can't get them.
And they're not going to be able to adequately support themselves if they take a job that is so low income, like the tourism industry. And I mentioned earlier that it is so subjected to external factors that what happens if another hurricane comes through, then they lose their job. So they're already making a low income, but now they've lost their job. That is not stable whatsoever. That is not benefiting them in the long term.
How are they going to get a job at SRS?
SRS is backed up by, again, federal support.
They don't have a college education. How are they going to get a job there?
I think it would be better to get a college education and work there. Plus, we're
They don't have the
not just talking about SRS. We're talking about Aiken Regional Medical Center. Manufacturing, you don't have to have a degree to go into manufacturing, but it still gives you more money than it would in a tourism industry.
You have a statistic to prove that manufacturing provides more money?
Yes, because it is in one of the top industries in Aiken County.
But what's the average wage?
The average wage is around $70,000.
Okay.
Okay, guys, we're going to be entering the final focus phase of this public forum debate. So you heard an excellent crossfire. Please keep their ideas in mind as we enter the final phase.
To conclude today's debate, I'd like to say that historical preservation is not a burden to society, rather a foundation of society. It is essential to Aiken's economy and historically rich culture that we continue to preserve historical sites and not diminish their significance. The negative right, or the affirmative risk.
Think about what kind of future Aiken County is creating, not just for today or the past, but for the people who are going to live here next. Because right now, this debate reaches much further than whether historic preservation should be prioritized. We are discussing whether the next generation will actually be able to afford to stay here, build a life here, and succeed here. It's revealed that economies centered on tourism and preservation tend to produce lower paying jobs compared to the high wages in industries that drive real economic growth. That gap matters. It determines whether people can afford housing, support families, or even continue appreciating the valuable history of our community. Aiken County is not standing still. It cannot remain frozen in time. Aiken County is a growing, evolving province, but growth only succeeds if we allow it to happen in a way that creates opportunity instead of limiting it. The real question here is, who is Aiken County being preserved for? Is it being preserved for the future, for students, families, and young professionals who want to build their lives here? Or is it being preserved in a way that makes it harder for them to belong at all? A strong community doesn't just honor its past, it creates space for the future. And that future depends on economic growth that provides stability, opportunity, and access for everyone. Preserving Aiken means nothing if people can't afford to live here. The negative risk.